Hello, Mr. Egil Lathe. I am Amomya from CRPH Support Group Norway, and thank you for participating in this talk show, during which we will talk about Burma's 2007 Saffron Revolution and other Buddhism-related matters. So, Mr. Egil, you are a Buddhist, a scholar in Buddhism, and leading an organization called Buddhist Federation in Norway, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so first of all, please tell us about how Buddhism affects your personal life and your way of thinking in daily life.
It's a very good question, because every Buddhist wants to be influenced by Buddhism in the daily life and so on. Of course, as an ordinary human being, I may not be like a kind of paragon of Buddhist virtues, although, of course, I like to think I'm quite okay as an ordinary person. But especially with Buddhist thinking, it's a lifelong engagement in trying to understand oneself and the world and the way we develop as human beings and so on and so forth. So I think in that respect, the Buddhist teachings are very important to me.
Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, so you are the leader of the Buddhist Federation in Norway. May I know your organization's past and present activities in Norway and in other countries?
Well, in Norway, Buddhism is a new religion, unlike Burma, which has a long history of Buddhism. I think we can talk about Buddhism in Norway since the 1970s, when some Buddhist groups were established by Norwegians, not by Buddhists coming from other countries, but by Norwegians. So in 1979, the Buddhist Federation of Norway was established. It was recognized by the government. At that time, it had very few registered individual members, and only 2 Buddhist associations were part of it. Now it has grown. More than 15,000 individuals are registered with the federation, and yes, about 15 individual Buddhist associations are also part of it. So it has developed, and I've been the chair or president of this association since 1988, actually. So I have a quite a long career in this organization, along with other people who have volunteered and worked. And for the last 4 years, I've also been the Secretary General. So I actually work for the Buddhist Federation along with 2 other employees in our office.
As you know, since 1962, Burma has been under different military dictatorships in one form or another, of course. And the one that we have now is the most brutal one. And as a Buddhist, how do you feel to see the sufferings of the people of Burma?
As an individual, of course, I have, you can say, affinity or special closeness to the Buddhist countries in Asia because of common faith in Buddhism. I've also been in Burma on my own way back in 1979. And of course, at that time, things were, you can say, different from how they have become afterwards. At that time, I think the Burmese economy had more or less collapsed. So people were managing on their own in the countryside, doing agriculture and so on. But walking around in Rangoon at that time, it was like the whole place was kind of quietly falling down or falling apart, and grass growing on the pavements, and very little care taken to maintain this place. And the cars were all from the 1950s. So it was like a time machine going back several decades. But at the same time, of course, you saw the poverty and the suffering of the people. So it was also somewhat distressing. And as time has passed, people in Myanmar, or Burma as it was, has risen up to demand democracy. And we all know what happened in the late 80s in Burma. Aung San Suu Kyi was jailed in her own house for such a long time. So it was really very distressing, I think, to many people, and especially those who had some kind of connection to Burma. And so you had this ancient Buddhist civilization and strong Buddhist engagement and rich Buddhist culture on one hand, and then you had this regime that became more and more, you can say, brutal and you can say suppressive in many ways, and especially with the economy developing after 1990 and socialism being kind of put backstage. You saw the military kind of grabbing all the resources and people being left with very little. So this picture became more and more, you can say, ugly as time went on.
Right. And talking about sufferings of the people, it's not only the people, laymen or laywomen are suffering, but also the monks are also suffering. Mm. And we have also heard that you and your organization has helped Buddhist monks in Burma during and after the Saffron Revolution. Can you tell us how you helped them?
Well, actually, the Buddhist Federation of Norway has engaged abroad now since more than 20 years in issues of human rights, freedom of religion, and also the conflict situation in Sri Lanka, trying to explore the possibility of peaceful reconciliation and so on. So we were already into this scene, so to speak, and cooperating with the Norwegian government and sometimes getting funding from them and so on. So obviously in 2007, with the so-called Saffron revolutions, with the monks walking out in the streets and coming with demands to the government, and especially when we saw how these hopes that the monks created was then very brutally crushed with a very violent response. Of course, it created a huge impact internationally. As Buddhists, we felt we had our own role to play. Maybe not a very big role, but we tried to do things, according to the opportunities that were there for us. So we actually sent letters to the embassies in Norway, China, India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, urging them to respond to the violence and clamp down on peaceful monks in Burma. We also sent a letter to General Tang Shui as well. I think the most important thing was probably the fact that we addressed the World Fellowship of Buddhists in Bangkok. Usually they are very careful not to express any political viewpoint on any issue whatsoever. But in this situation, the president of the World Fellowship of Buddhists actually wrote, I think, a quite good letter to General Tang Shui, urging him to refrain from suppression and violence of Buddhist monks and so on. So there were others engaging too. So I remember I was at the City Hall Square in Oslo, and everyone had dressed in red as a show of solidarity with the monks in Burma. The then Bishop Gunnar Stålsett was a speaker, and of course he has also been involved with the issue in Burma afterwards for quite a long time. So we had some cooperation with him as well.
Now let's talk about the current situations in Burma. Due to the military's relentless killings, extreme brutality, and continued oppression, as you know, some people have obviously abandoned peaceful protests and taken arms against the military. It was to defend themselves. On the other hand, they are the same people who strongly believe the words of Buddha that goes, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. But it seems to be that their deeds and their belief are now in direct contradiction. So what do you think happened to them? And what would you do if you were in their position?
Of course, in Buddhism, there's, you can say one has tried to solve this dilemma by having the monastic order of monks that maintain the moral principles to the full extent, that they never exercise any form of power through violence at all. And of course, amazingly, this order of monks and nuns has continued for about 2,500 years, which is a very long period of time. So you can say that even without protecting themselves with arms, they have managed to survive and to prosper. But I don't really think that solves the problem, because as a real country, as a real community, you may have to choose the use of force, of violence, because sometimes you are faced with you can say threat of violence or actual violence, and then you need to decide what to do. Should you only be a pacifist, in the sense that you never resist military force with anything else than like your moral position, something like that. I think that is a very hard position to take, because obviously you would invite all the bad people to come and bully you if that is your position. Taking up arms is a very serious matter. It has huge consequences. There are huge costs in terms of suffering and so on. So of course one should always consider the alternative to the use of violence. But I think this is a very hard choice.
Another question. In the ancient Indian philosophical thought, as well as in Buddhism, the kings or the rulers were supposed to be observing the noble duty of the king, which is called Raj Dharma, or good governance. Although the military government is by no means the rightful ruler of the country, they could at least behave more civilized than they do now. If you were to offer some good advice to the military rulers, what would that be?
It's a very interesting question. I think the specific problem in Burma right now is that you have an authoritarian regime that have messed up things in a terrible manner. So what to do? I think this kind of advice that you find in this 10 Rajadhamma. In these 10 Rajadhammas, there is, I think, the point that the ruler, the king, should, take the opinions of the people into account. That should respect the wishes of the people. That, in a way, although the ruler has the power, the ruler should, in a way, be the servant of the people, although he is also the lord of the people. So I think this would apply, of course, to military dictators and so on. So to that extent, I mean, they always have the responsibility to act morally. Problem is that they have acted very immorally and you can say messed up.
The successive military governments in Burma have a tradition of mixing politics and religion, also nationalism and racism. Their purpose was obviously to seek support from the majority Buddhist people. As a result, some monks, as well as ordinary Buddhist people, harbor hatred and prejudice against people of other races and religions. What does Buddhism say about prejudice and discrimination?
I think on this point, this is very easy to give an answer, because there is no way at all where you can reconcile Buddhism with discrimination and hatred of others. There is just no way to excuse it. It has no place in Buddhism. Sure. So it's like you make a mockery out of Buddhism if you pretend to be a Buddhist, and then you hate people because they are, belonging to some other ethnic group or religion or whatever. That doesn't, fit.
Yes, and we know that politics has always been part of Buddhism, because the Tipitaka contains numerous references to and discussions of kings, princes, wars, and policies, as well as advice to rulers about how to govern well. But these are mainly for lay people, not for monks. However, some monks in Burma are highly active in politics. Some are pro-democratic, and some are on the side of the military. Should they be engaging in politics at all? What is your opinion?
Well, it's also a very interesting question, because I think this issue has become more, you can say, urgent or problematic in places like Sri Lanka, where monks have, in a way, justified on religious grounds that they should engage in politics and so on. And I think it's a good example showing the problems that comes out of this approach, because you can say to some extent monks should care about the political situation, because there's a moral dimension to it. I mean, if you have a ruthless dictatorship that abuse people and torture people and imprison people and make the whole country into a mess, and even damage the economy and the people's livelihood and so on and so forth, I think monks have a duty as monks to speak out and say that here there is wrongdoing here is something that goes against Buddhism that is happening. This is adhamma. This is a violation of fundamental moral principles. And I think a very essential aspect of Buddhism is ethics. There are certain moral principles that you need to follow in order to be a real human being and to have a prosperous, just and society. So I think to that extent, monks are justifying in engaging politically, but they should not play the power game. Of course, lay people need to obtain power, to exercise power, and that's also challenging. I mean, in a moral sense, you have to do it, properly, not improperly. But monks should stay out of it. They should never be, the rulers of the country. They should never be political leaders. I mean, country need rulers and political leaders, but that's not their role. Right. And they should not have a divisive part. I mean, they have a main concern, which is the spiritual liberation, which is essential.
Yes, maybe this is my last question, which is, all human beings are, as per Buddhism, are equal. And Buddhist concepts recognize the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all human beings. Yet we have witnessed and still witnessing serious human rights abuses in Buddhist countries, such as previously Cambodia and Sri Lanka and now in Burma. What do you think is the reason for that?
It's a very important question because obviously it's very distressing to see that a country with a civilization that have been nurtured by Buddhism, that has existed for a long time, falls into this, you can say, abyss of moral depravity, where people kill each other, where you have serious human rights violations and so forth, even by people who call themselves Buddhists and kind of try to make a point out of being pious Buddhists and so on. But I think, in a way, the distressing thing may not be the fact that you have Buddhism and you have these abominations and cruelty and barbarism. I think Buddhism is very clear about human beings being both good and bad. I mean, we have the purity, the wisdom, the light within ourselves. And through the practice, it can be nurtured and it can develop and it can, become our, real being. But on the other hand, Buddhism talks about the kilesas, the greed, the hatred, aggression, the confusion, the selfishness, and so on. So these forces are also very strong, and we see them playing out everywhere with Buddhists who should know better, but still they fall prey to these defilements and do horrible things. And we see it like in Europe, of course, we have a very big example of this collapse of culture, this collapse of religion, where religion becomes impotent and, the dark forces take over. Like in Germany, they had Christian civilization for more than 1,000 years, which definitely did not tell them to exterminate children and old people and women and men just because they were, Jews. It's very distressing and, painful to see. So whether it happens in Germany or in like with the Pol Pot in Cambodia or with generals in Burma, it's still painful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Egil Lathe, for participating in this discussion and offering your good thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you.